All right, everybody got head out? Great. Well, I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. You know why? Because I actually try them both ways. I took pictures and things with my phone, and I actually found when I had the handout, I go home, right away put into my pedagogy books according to the topics, and I can find that in 5 seconds rather than my phone. It's like, oh, what year and what month that I did it. So here you go. All right, well, we're going to talk about this topic that every piano teacher loves, right? How to get our students to practice more. So the topic is effective practicing, transformative practice strategies to develop confident musicians. So, how do piano students feel about practice? Well, the questions are, why are they not practicing? And we're going to talk about what are some common practice problems of the students. And once we know that, why and what, how do we train them so they can practice effectively to build their confidence in their music making? Several years ago, there were two teachers who did a national survey of high school pianists from 69 teachers across 36 states. So pretty representative. And they asked several questions about their high school pianists, wanted to know their comments and reactions to piano in general and to a lot of other things. So they asked, what's the one thing that you least enjoy about studying piano? Guess what the students said? Practicing. But the interesting thing is, they continue to ask, why? Why did you not enjoy practicing? Any of you wanted to answer that? Yes.
Lonely.
It's lonely. Okay. Anything else?
It's boring.
It's boring. Anything else?
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating. And?
Didn't know how.
Didn't know how. Well, were you in the survey? Because you got all those answers. Top one answer. Students feel like practicing was boring. Top one. And yes, it was frustrating. And then, this is interesting. Don't forget, they're high school students. I'm not in the mood. And they also said, practice requires a lot of discipline. So, and finally, this is probably even more so today compared to when they did the survey. I don't have enough time. So now, we know why are they not practicing. But what are we going to do about it? So with every one of those answers, do we have a solution that we can try to help? And personally, here are my top 10. So drum roll. Number 1, mindless repetition. How many of your students do that? Well, some of you probably don't know. Oh my gosh. I can tell you how interesting that is if you can have a camera at your students' home to watch their practice. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So number 1, mindless repetition. Number 2, Always starting from measure 1. Why do they do that? Because they know they measure the best. It feels the best. And number 3, always only practice their favorite parts. Number 4, the speed devil, always practice so fast. Number 5, the clock watcher, keep watching the clock, like what time is it now? How much time did I spend already? And then the chronic traffic sign violator, that means they never pay attention to anything that's written on the score. They just play what they want. And the back layers, teacher said, you have to work on this measure, that's your technical spot. They did, but they never put it back. So when they had to do it, it never worked. And some of them practice, but never listen to what they were practicing. And others, impulsive spider fingers, they just react to everything. And the last one on my top 10 list, the king or queen of procrastination. They don't practice until the very end. I want to tell you this one thing about my very, very long time ago when I was a doctoral degree. I had a student called David. And you know the teenagers, you know what they love the most? Is to prove you wrong. So, but you have to be smart. So David one day came and said, why do I have to practice every day? I can just practice 6 hours a day, the day before my lesson. Yeah, instead of practicing 1 hour every day, I could just practice 6 hours a day, just that day, the day before my lesson. What would you say? You know, you have to have the strategy. So I said, David, great idea. If you don't eat from Monday to Saturday and you eat and get all your meals on Saturday, then you can practice only the day before your lesson. Let's give it a try next week. So just gave me a look. So just be a little, you know, like a little ahead of them. And you always agree because that's the thing. They know that you don't agree, and they wanted to just see where's your limit. Okay. So, anyways, there are some quotes like Nancy. When Nancy was giving her presentation, I just loved it. You know, the article that she read, the book that she read. Those were all the things that I also love. I was just like, oh, no wonder we're good friends. Okay, so Robert Pace said, piano practice is musical problem solving that combines thinking and physical coordination. Most of our students had trouble because they only have what? They only did the physical. They didn't have the thinking. Next, practice makes perfect, right? No?
Progress.
Only if you practice perfectly. And here's my goal for my students. The goal for piano practice is to achieve the best musical results in the shortest possible time with the needed correct repetition. I don't want them to practice 8 hours a day. I want them to practice correctly so they can have 4 hours to watch TV and talk with friends and do other things. And I did some readings of a lot of articles regarding practicing, and I found a lot of very interesting things I would like to share with you. So, there are 4 stages of practicing identified by researchers in learning a new piece. Okay? And they found it's most effective if you do the big picture first. You get to know the overview of your work, and you could do that like listening on YouTube, watch your score, do the analysis. Those are your first step, basic. Then, step 2, you get into the technical practice to overcome your problems and then to achieve automation. It has to, have you noticed that? You learn a new piece, and at the beginning, it's so frustrated until one day, somehow, suddenly, like, oh, I think I got it. And that's when you started to enjoy it. So that's at that magical moment when it becomes automated. And then after that, after you get the automation, then you started to also secure your memory, work on your memory, and you actually work on memory a lot sooner, except then at the point that you achieve automation, then your memory also gets much more solid. Third stage, now you're polishing that piece up for performance. Concert or competition or whatever, but that's your third stage, you're at the polishing stage. And finally, a lot of us, we somehow did not do it as successfully for the stage 4, which is, how do you maintain your piece after you got it? And we will hopefully have time to talk about that. So now, I was so delighted that Nancy talked about her student practicing only 5 minutes. So, because this is what the researcher said. The quantity of practice suggested by research to achieve expert level. And you're gonna love this. You can take it home and tell your students, aha, research showed that you're gonna have to do that in order to be the expert. So, very, very hard to do. In order to become the expert of whatever you're doing, it requires 4 hours of practice per day. That's what their survey got the result. And you do this over 10 years. Now you become an expert. You can do the math and see how many hours total. Yeah. But that is if they want you to become the expert. But there are different levels of accomplishment. And then the other interesting thing, guess which group of musicians practice the most? Anyone? Piano, right? Okay. Well, the singers practice the least. So, and that probably, even with your common sense of knowledge, you probably could guess that. So the pianists are always the best students compared to everyone else. Okay, so now I again wanted to remind you about what I talked about in the first lecture. Make sure you use all those in your practice. I think a lot of times our students only did what? Their hands. That's why the whole thing didn't quite work well, and the result wasn't as durable. And I'm going to go through that very quickly. You already saw this. So they have to read well in order to be able to practice well. Their reading skills has to be good. They have to be listening to what they're doing at the piano. And their technique has to be solid. And they have to know the tones. If they're only trying to strike a note out of this piano, they won't enjoy it as much in their practice. Their body has to be involved and feel that in her mind. Their mind has to be involved so that they can understand what they're doing. And how do they develop their solid memory so that they can polish that up for performance. And finally, what does this piece mean to them that they're practicing? So, now let's talk about the prerequisite. In order to get our students to practice effectively, what needs to happen before then? The very first thing is you have to get the right repertoire. It's incredible that you find the right piece and somehow something changed. I remember my pedagogy teacher, Joanne Smith from University of Michigan. She has a folder called pupil savers. So she said to us, when somebody says, I'm quitting piano, she gives them one of the pieces from that folder. And somehow those pieces that she collected, they made it to that folder, were incredible student savers. So I hope you also develop your own. So there are some pieces you know the students will be hooked once you give those pieces to them. So give them the right repertoire. What does it mean, right repertoire? Well, number one, it better sound appealing. It has to sound good. And hopefully it's fun. It's fun to play. And then it hopefully can stimulate their imagination. And especially if you have teenagers, better be dramatic. Or with, like, stereotype, but mostly true. For teenage girls, lyrical and romantic. And somehow the tactile pieces are winners. And snappy, also comfortable under their hands, rich in harmony. Those are all my criteria. And last thing, make sure it's appropriate difficulty level for that student. So if you find something that's way too hard, they're gonna get into that frustration mode and they don't want to practice. Well, once you start with the right repertoire, then let's talk about how much assignment. So if you do a survey for your students in your studio, what would be the average practice time? What do you think? 15 minutes? Okay, anybody more? 30? Okay. Well, guess what? Depending on that number, that is the reality, isn't it? I said they are a lot busier now than before. There's so many things that just, bring their interest everywhere. So I think we're gonna have to really think practically. We wish they could practice 4 hours a day. Yes. But if they're not, are we just let them quit taking the piano? That's my last lesson today. So let me ask you, if the reality is, if you only 15 minutes, your students will practice 15 minutes a day, what are you going to get them to practice? What do you think they can do in that 15 minutes so that they can still learn something and they can still continue with their piano study in a meaningful way? So I may not have the solutions for you, but I'd like for you to think about those questions so that you can find answers for your students. So think about, if they practice 15 minutes, what do you want them to do? If they practice 30 minutes, what do you want them to do? Yeah. So I had a student before, scales and arpeggios. Oh, I don't have time to practice those. So we just somehow find a more creative solution. I said, okay, how about let's do it now, like this. Every time you pass the piano, you sit down and practice the scale once. I don't know why he would just avoid going to the other way. But be creative. Do something about their time. Well, again, secure their music reading so it doesn't take them so long just to read the notes. Because your 15 minutes could be just that. Okay? But if they have good music reading skills, you can do a lot more things. And don't forget to teach them the technical foundation. If they have the tools to do what they want musically, they're more likely to practice. And yes, do teach your music theory, but make sure it's something that they understand, rather than something that's only an abstract concept or theory, but something they are learning concurrently. Do lots of pattern recognition and score analysis, like how we did it last time, okay, like in the last hour. So those are good things that hopefully could get you all those prerequisites well before they start really working hard on practicing. So then, there are a few concepts that I'd like to share with you. In addition to you give them the right repertoire, remember this, practice needs to be taught. They would never be automatically know how to practice, like how we really hope for. But if you teach them how to practice and how to practice correctly, it will become a habit. And then they will really know what to do. Get them to be used to the goal-oriented practice rather than, oh, practice 30 minutes. What about practice those two measures correctly 5 times? How about that? So that earlier we're like, wanted students to really take charge, be accountable, but you need to give them something so they can be accountable. And I would love it if they are being accountable, not just to me, but to themselves, and they know how. Be sure you teach them about how to plan it. They have to plan their practice. And we'll talk even more about that. How do they plan on their practice in a minute? When they practice, not only the right notes are important, the right rhythm, but the sound. What kind of sound are they getting from the piano? Do they feel comfortable physically? Do they know where they don't feel comfortable physically? And do they have any emotions or meanings that they are able to associate with every single phrase? And finally, if they can be systematic, the research actually shows that if you practice every day at the same time, the set time, that's easier to make the habit. Just like you brush your teeth only at always at that time, same thing. We're much more geared to the effective practice if you can manage them. And sufficient time is important. 5 minutes may not be able to do it. It takes some extra things, like in order to make that solid. And that's gonna become circle. Every piece, you can use the same approach. All right? What are the tools we can give our students for practicing? Here are my suggestions. I start my students with sticky notes. Why? Easy to write things down, easy to throw away when they accomplish that. And they can always see what's gonna be on that sticky note. So for example, what's the goal of today's practice? Okay, I have to practice sunset, measure 1 to 4, and metronome speed 90. Maybe that's their goal. They write that on the sticky note, and it stays there until they achieve that goal. So that becomes their guide for the practice that day. And once they're done, okay, throw it away, accomplished. Okay, so that's why sticky note so good, easy to use. Yes.
You mentioned they write it. So do you have them write it on the sticky note?
Yeah.
Ownership?
Because we do that in lessons, and I will show them how to do that. But then when they go home to practice, guess what? I don't have control over that, so I need to know what they do at home. And so we just practice. This is how you're going to practice at home, and then I would write things on the sticky notes, such as, and then I would ask them, okay, what about this B section? What would be your goal? What would you write on the sticky note? Yeah. Okay, other questions? Okay, now, second, they have to have highlighters. Yeah. And by the way, I do this with my students. They have to buy the real music, but after they purchase the real music, then they make copies of that. And we can draw as much as we like, highlight as much as we like on their copies, but not on the original music. That's why the highlighters, okay? And, if you say pick your favorite color and to highlight or draw on the things that you didn't do well, I think that makes a difference. Their favorite color, they are drawing to that. So, And so, they need to write down what they did well and what they didn't do well. All right, metronome for sure. But please don't just assign and say, go home and practice with metronome. 99% of them would not do it. Do it in your lesson. Show them exactly what do you mean by practicing with the metronome. And see how they do. Then you know after they get home whether they would do it and whether they would do it correctly. So do show them from very young, like show them how to practice with metronome if that's what you really value. Here's the secret weapon. That is the stopwatch. And now a lot of people have their phones, right? To do a stopwatch is very easy. And why do I use stopwatch? I don't want them to waste time. So I would do games like this. Okay, there's this technical measure that the student is having trouble. I said, how many minutes do you think you would need to master this measure? And then, you would say, maybe 5. Then, okay, let's give it a try. We get the stopwatch on, and the students start to practice. And I will keep my quiet, I just observe what the students do. In 5 minutes, to see whether they made it or not. If they didn't make it, then maybe 7 minutes. So they learn to adjust how much time they would assign to solve one musical problem. Does it make sense? Okay? But stop me if you have anything that I need to explain more. All right? The phone. So, the technology is here. They all have their phones. Make good use of it. I have them record with their phone a lot because the phone would not lie. So whatever they say, I said, okay, let's record it. Now you watch it. A lot of times I do slow motion recording for them to see. See, don't raise the second finger before you want to play it. I did it.
So you have them record their whole practice session or just a certain?
No, certain things, because when you record so long, they don't watch it. I only let them record things that I really think is important, and then, or if I want to hear how they practice, I said, record and show me your best practice of the week. Guess what? How many times do you think they're going to record to get the best practice? That's my purpose. Okay. Here's the checklist for them. Number 1, first priority, accuracy and fingering. How many of your students would really pay that much attention to fingering right from the start? Raise your hand. How many of you wish your students would do that? Yeah. Without finding the best fingerings, I told them your practice could be totally wasted. Because no matter how hard you work, you won't play well because you didn't have a good fingering to start with. So what does it mean? I have to teach them how to get the best fingering for their pieces. And I need to make sure they know how to so that they can do it alone. And rhythm and tempo. At the beginning, most of our students chose to practice too fast. So, but it's so interesting. I tried that so many times. I said, they play? I said, Ethan, play slower. What did you hear? The exact same tempo. And do you know, I sincerely believe he was trying to do it slower. It just, that habit was so much there that they couldn't. Therefore, you have to have your metronome. If you just say practice slower, it never worked. Okay, so now we decided on a metronome tempo. And how do I decide the metronome tempo? At what speed you could play this passage or those two measures without any mistakes. That's the guide. Then he would have to find the metronome. Like, at what speed I can do that. Okay, so try to establish that good habit of how to find the right tempo for resistance. Evenness and clarity, what skill does it take? The ears. A lot of times they're so busy trying to just get the right notes, they don't listen to what they play. And that's not a good habit. Start right from the beginning. I love for them to already put in their spices. Don't just learn the right notes and rhythm and then later put in your spices. Your pot roast would not taste good. Phrasing and timing. How do you teach students about phrasing? One very easy trick. You sing. If you guide the students to sing the phrase, wherever they feel really natural to breathe, that's when you take the phrase break. Balance. How many of you heard students? Yeah, you know, again, how do you convince them? Don't do that. Record it. Let them hear it. They did not know that's what they sounded like. Voicing, the melody always has to be the most obvious. Don't waste the time when you teach the. Make sure they voice. Train the ears, train the fingers, do the exercise, so get everything done in one. Don't let them just play mindlessly, because if they do that, you don't like it, and they wasted the time. So do something with it. Tone and touches. So the technique is so important if your students know how to make a good sound at the piano. Articulation, nuances. We're now talking about a lot of very artistic things that's going to really make their practice wonderful, because their musical satisfaction is so much more once they can put all those in there. The natural flow and fluidity, that's going to make their performance a lot more enjoyable if they can do that. And I ask them a lot about, are you comfortable right here? And if you are not comfortable, we have to figure out why makes you not comfortable. So any technical spot, that's a very important thing to check. If they don't feel comfortable physically, they won't play that beautifully. Okay, the structure, the dynamics, those usual things. And then we talk about characters and emotions. How do you feel about this piece? How do you feel about this particular phrase? What do you think it's saying? So get them to tell you, what does that phrase mean to them? Okay, for every measure.
Will you go back for one
Oh,
more
sure.
second? Thank you.
Okay. All right. For every measure, be sure you get them to do the three basic elements: the physical, and the mental, and then finally the emotional. Those three have to work together so that that measure that they practice really is secure and really will be wonderful. Now, are you ready to start? So physically, try to get them to do the following. We said, what's the most important thing? The first item of practice, they have to have good fingerings. Okay? So do the slow practice. That means mistake-free. Get their fingerings correct. And I have them sing to add their phrasing and punctuation. Have them move so that they can feel how the music is going. And don't be too greedy. They only have to be successful with a small unit plus the next note. And they build from that foundation. From the small unit to larger unit to the whole 4-measure unit to all 8 measures, they build from the small. After they got all those units, make sure you connect them so they will be very good brick layers. And I encourage them to add their spices immediately, even with 1 measure. After they are able to play one measure very beautifully, like, very accurately, we talk about what can make this beautiful and what do you need to do. And if they play one measure so nicely, guess what? They're more motivated to do the next measure. So they're gonna have to be motivated by their own play in order to want to continue. And sometimes when they did well, I said, that sounded like a CD. You have one measure that sounds so much like the YouTube really good video playing. Yes.
How do you stop a student that wants to play the whole song and learn the whole song now? I tell her, one measure, get it learned, add another measure. Learn the next two, and she insists on doing the whole song. In fact, you're going to be working with her today. And she insists.
Thank you for the warning.
She insists on learning the whole song. And I keep telling her, don't eat elephants. Share with the villagers. But she wants to do the whole song. How do you stop that? I mean, I've even got to the point of making Xerox and giving her a line at a time. But then she, because it's in a book, I can't take her book. She goes to the book. And it's like, how do you stop that?
Well, I think I will attempt to, number one, I would only listen to a measure perfectly in the lesson. I want to ensure that she can do, like, let's say, one of her hardest measures perfectly in the lesson. And I would only work with that measure. I won't hear anything else. And the interesting thing about students, they do that. If you listen, they play, they come, you listen to the whole piece, guess what? They say, that worked, right? And then they will come back and they will do it again because you're gonna listen to it. But if you don't listen to it, I only want to hear whether you did this measure perfectly. And she would say, oh, but I practiced it. I said, until you get this perfectly. So if you don't listen, I think their motivation is a lot less of playing the whole piece. Maybe they will still do it, but at least I can make sure her most important problem spot can be solved in a lesson.
We do that, but she still wants the whole thing.
I think at the beginning, to know the whole structure, okay. But then after that, I would say this week, I would only want to hear section A perfectly. If you can do section A perfectly, you can go next.
Go.
And how can she show me that it's perfect? Videotape. If it really sounds perfect, I'll let her. But if she hears that it's not perfect in the video, guess what? Our agreement is you cannot go forward until this is done. Yeah. So I don't know. I may have a better idea after this afternoon. We'll see about how to deal with it. Okay. So other things, other comments or questions? Okay. I also would like to advocate for early memory work. I feel like even my college students, when they start to do the memory work too late, they're not as solid and they didn't enjoy it as much and they couldn't perform early enough. So do the early memory work and hopefully they will learn faster. So I have a few of the junior piano majors now. They now know the wonderful result if they do the early memory work. So now they're very motivated. They wanted to get it started memory a lot sooner. Yes?
Would you include pedaling in this section as well?
Everything. Because I like them to, remember I said one measure perfectly? That means everything. So that measure is gonna be able to go on stage, go on to competitions. And once they have that, I just know that they will be motivated by themselves because they already did something so well and I complimented them on that. That really is absolutely first-rate quality. And I wanted them to be motivated by their own success. And I said, well, you already did one measure. This piece is only 16 measures. You just have to make every measure sound like that, and you have it. So, okay. All right, for the mental part, okay, Don't forget about the patterns and the forms. And now for the more advanced students, use the highlighters, do the subject voicing, the important melodies, all those on their score. I don't like to see something so like totally blank in their copies, because I said that means you haven't thought about anything. And anything they have decided and make a decision, I like for them to write it down. So figuring their patterns, their form, all those, they have to write that down on their music. Okay, can they figure out the relationship, and then later this afternoon in the master class, hopefully we'll address some of those. Do they know the harmony? Do you have your students write down the harmony when they hear it? Like, you know, if they do, guess what? Then they apply their theory knowledge in the real pieces. That's why they feel like theory is relevant. If you never have them write down the harmony and things that they see in the score, they think theory, pieces. They never make the connection. All right, what is their dynamic plan? How many of you have students, when they see crescendo, what do? Immediate. So this is the thing I taught them. You need to know, what are you starting? Where are you going? Whenever you start crescendo, so now they have to define crescendo, not getting loud. I have them start crescendo. When you see a crescendo, what does it mean? Start softer. So now the definition is different, and then they will go immediate. Okay? So the planning has to be planned and taught. Okay, finally, get the sound. The sound is what can inspire them to want to practice. If they can play with beautiful sound, they get inspired by themselves. Okay, so quickly, let me go through the emotional. So, ask about that from the start, even the beginning students. What does that mean? What are you trying to say? So they get used to using their music to say something they want. And talk about this so much in your lesson. What's the character of this piece? This sounds very proud. And those are the things that they understand, the emotion. If you are able to associate that with the music, so now play that phrase, really proud. You usually are, and me, usually are so impressed by it when they can really make the connection. Imagery and stories, beautiful thing to do even with adult students. Like I once talked to my college students about an etude, and she just played it just really notey. And I thought, didn't you feel like that sounds like a spider going up to your hand? And immediately she played, ooh! So yeah, once they can have that image, that's what needs to be. Okay, and then talk about the peak, the surprises, and the climaxes. So the music has something dramatic. Otherwise, it's going to be too plain. It's too boring. Okay. And finally, you can talk about the nuances. Show them, play, demonstrate. What's the difference between this sound and that sound? What did you hear? How does that make you feel? And I'm a firm believer that if you can let your body show how you feel, not in a very unnatural way, okay, not like that, but when they feel so excited, like, hooray, you know, if their body can really show the audience about that, their audience can understand their excitement a lot better. So do that properly. So find out where and how to do that with your students. It makes them enjoy their own music a lot more. For the teenagers who are shy, you're gonna again have to do video. Because I had my students, I said, do that more. She did until I showed her the video. And she said, ooh, I thought I was doing a lot. They thought that they were doing a lot, but it didn't show much. And you know, sometimes she would say, a student would say, but that would look unnatural. I never try to convince them with words. I just video. So do it this way and do it this way. Which one looks more unnatural? Show them. And then they can make their own decision. They're much more convinced once they can see that on their own. So you don't have to say much. Okay, so
No, already way over time.
yeah, so I just stop right here.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully, originally I had the videos to show you, but let me just finish this by the summary. The 4-step sequence of your practice should include listen, sound, feel, physical, and the comfort. Then you assess yourself, how did you do in the sound and the feel. Then you give yourself some plan to experiment. And then you try it to see whether it gets better. And if it gets better, that's a keeper. Then finally, you have to make changes. So just circular of those to make sure that everything you did will be very effective and not wasting the time. Okay, thank you so much.